Today, I'm not here to talk about what you see. I'm here to talk about what you don't see, and about everything you think you see, but which is actually an illusion. In the Bible, blindness is not just a disability. It's a sentence, a judgment, a warning, a mystery, and sometimes a revelation. There are those who are born blind, who have never known the light, and there are others who one day lose it, as if heaven decided to extinguish their world. The big question is uncomfortable. Is it punishment? Is it destiny? Is it injustice? Or is it a plan? Moses warned that blindness could be a curse of the covenant. The angel struck Sodom blind because of its perversion. God himself blinded entire armies to save his people. And yet, the same God commands, do not put a stumbling block before the blind. So what is blindness? Punishment or protection? Judgment or mercy? Now listen carefully. The most dangerous blind person in the Bible is not the one who cannot see with their eyes, but the one who cannot see with their soul. The prophets called kings, priests, and entire nations blind, who had perfect sight but were dead inside. Jesus himself declared that there were blind people who saw more than some Pharisees. And here comes the part that nobody wants to accept. We, can also be one of them. Perhaps you see reality, you see the news, you see your surroundings. But do you see the truth? Do you see the sin or the mistakes? Do you see what you are willfully ignoring? Whom have you decided not to see? What reality suits you to remain in darkness? In this class, we are not only going to talk about physically blind people, we are going to expose spiritual blindness, moral blindness, emotional blindness, and the collective blindness of modern societies. And when we finish, you will no longer be able to say, I didn't know, I didn't see it. Because from today on, seeing will be your responsibility. This is Abel Flores speaking, and I thank you for being with us on your channel, La Mishna TV, studying and dedicating time to these studies, which aim to help you continue growing in your spiritual development so that you can also help others. Thank you very much. Let's begin. Sometimes, when we open Parashah Vaishlaj, we feel like we're entering emotionally dense territory. It's a portion where each scene seems to ask us to take a deep breath, because nothing is simple, and nothing is what it seems at first glance. And I want to invite you to journey through it with me as if we were walking alongside Jacob, hearing the rustling of the leaves, feeling the weight of history, and wondering, almost in a whisper, what it truly means to grow up. Jacob begins by sending messengers to Esau. And here's a fascinating detail. The text says, Vaishlaj Yaakov Malachim. Jacob sent messengers. But tradition wonders if they weren't actually literal angels. It's ironic, isn't it? One flees from an enraged brother, and years later sends angels to let him know he's returning. It's the kind of subtle humor that the Torah elegantly drops in. The truth is, Jacob is afraid. It's not weakness, it's historical awareness. He knows what he left behind. That's why he deploys 3 strategies. He prays, he sends gifts, and he prepares a defense. The prayer, incidentally, is almost a desperate whisper. Katanti mikol hajasadim, I am unworthy of all the kindnesses you have shown me. In an era where everyone boasts of power, Jacob inaugurates the language of humility. The final encounter with Esau is a moment that always surprises. There are no knives, no ambushed armies. Esau runs, embraces him, cries. It sounds like a miracle, but it also sounds like those family reunions where the past weighs heavily, the present is emotional, and the future is uncertain. Because even though they embrace, Jacob refuses to walk alongside him. It's an embrace without total reconciliation, as if to say, I love you, brother, but let's keep a certain distance just in case. And who hasn't had relationships like that? And just when we think Jacob has had enough emotion for one day, the nighttime scene arrives, a mysterious fight. The text says Ish, a man. The sages say an angel. The Zohar hints that it was Esau's guardian angel. Modern psychology would say it was his inner shadow. And all interpretations make sense, because in that struggle, the human drama is encapsulated, confronting what we don't understand about ourselves. The angel wounds him in the hip, in Hebrew, kaf hayarech, a blow to the root of movement. And yet Jacob does not let go. I will not let you go until you bless me. What a brutally honest phrase. We all bear scars, but we demand that the pain leave us with a blessing. And the blessing comes in the form of a new name, Israel, the one who struggles with God, or perhaps the one who does not surrender to the mystery. The story of Dinah arrives like a blunt blow. No embellishments, no euphemisms. The text says that Shechem took Dinah and afflicted her. It is violence without disguise. Her brothers, Simeon and Levi, respond with more violence, deception, mass circumcision, and massacre. The biblical ethics here are complex and unsettling, like life itself. Jacob rebukes his sons, worried about the consequences, but the Midrash adds that he also inwardly wonders if his previous silence contributed to the disaster. There are no easy answers, only uncomfortable questions. And as if the Torah wanted to remind us that this family, with all its chaos, is still human, the deaths arrive. Deborah, the wet nurse who cared for Rebekah, an almost invisible woman but so beloved that her death receives a name, Alon Bahut, the Oak of Weeping. Then Rachel, on the road, giving birth to Benjamin. Her tomb to this day is a symbol of tears and hope. Finally, Isaac. The death of the patriarch marks the end of an era, like when a house suddenly becomes too big for the adult children. The Parashah concludes with the genealogy of Esau. These are the generations of Esau, father of Edom. A long, detailed, almost bureaucratic list. But behind those names lies the birth of a people who will walk alongside Israel, sometimes as an ally, often as an adversary. It is a reminder that history is not reduced to heroes and villains. It is built among brothers who took different paths. And perhaps that is the most human lesson of Vayetze. Life is a mixture of nocturnal struggles, incomplete reunions, difficult decisions, painful losses, and new generations that keep moving forward. But in every wound, if we are patient, there is also a hidden blessing. Because being Israel is not about winning every battle. It is about refusing to stop walking, even limping. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is what God expects of us. Sometimes, when we open this parashah, we feel that the Torah is speaking to us on two levels. One emotional, almost intimate, and another historical, which unfolds like a map of human destiny. And I want to invite you to explore these themes with me, not as cold concepts, but as living threads that continue to pulsate in our daily experience. The reconciliation between Jacob and Esau is the first major echo. It's not a naive embrace, it's an adult embrace. The Torah reminds us that forgiveness does not cancel the need for prudence. In Hebrew, we would say mechilah without losing seichel, good judgment. Esau runs, embraces, cries, but Jacob moves slowly, calculates, observes, not out of pathological distrust, but because shared history weighs heavily, and complex relationships require clear boundaries. It's a profoundly relevant lesson. Forgiving doesn't mean handing over the steering wheel of your life to someone who once hurt you. Then comes the name change. Jacob becomes Israel. In Hebrew, Israel comes from Sarita, you have struggled, and from El, with the divine. It's not an aesthetic change, it's an evolutionary leap. Jacob stops living defensively and begins to live confrontationally. The nocturnal struggle is almost a mirror. One fights with God, with an angel, with the shadow of the brother, or, in modern terms, with oneself. And at dawn, after the wound, a new identity is born. The Torah tells us something precious. Maturity arrives when we stop running away and begin to name what hurts us. The case of Dinah takes us out of comfortable territory. Justice or revenge, honor or ethics, pain or brutality. Simeon and Levi choose direct fire. Jacob, on the other hand, observes the repercussions. The text forces us to look at violence without filters and ask ourselves the uncomfortable question: what happens when moral outrage turns into indiscriminate destruction? It's a very old and horribly contemporary theme. The Torah doesn't offer us a simple answer because authentic justice is rarely simple. And here enters a silent but powerful concept: memory. The deaths of Deborah, Rachel, and Isaac remind us that each generation places its weight on the next. Continuity is not linear, it is affective. Rachel's tears on the road, the tomb that is still visited, the figure of Isaac who is silenced at the end. Everything points to the same thing. You cannot build a future without honoring the memory of those who sustained history before us. Finally, Edom appears, the descendants of Esau. Long genealogies, almost unpronounceable names, but full of purpose. It is the origin of a neighboring people, both brother and rival. A reminder that historical tensions do not arise from nothing. They have familial, cultural, and spiritual roots. Israel and Edom will walk together and in conflict, reflecting each other like two branches that grew twisted in different directions. If we connect all these threads, the Parashah gives us an almost hidden phrase. To grow is to learn to walk with prudence, with identity, with justice, with memory, and with the awareness that our decisions, good or bad, never remain within us. They continue, they expand, they are inherited. Perhaps that is why this portion insists, again and again, on showing us wounds, embraces, new names, questionable acts, and endless genealogies. Because in the end, life itself is that mixture. And our task, as Israel, the one who struggles, is to transform it into a worthy path, even if sometimes we walk it limping. Now, let's talk about the central theme of this class, blindness. Allow me to invite you to enter this scene as if we were in the dim light of Yitzhak's tent, listening to his slow breathing, watching his hands move through the air to feel a world he can no longer see. Because everything the Torah says is surprisingly simple, and, at the same time, it opens up an abyss of interpretations. The basic text, Vayahi ki zaken Yitzhak vatishena einav meot, when Yitzhak grew old, his eyes dimmed from seeing, seems almost clinical due to old age, nothing more. And yet that textual silence is what leaves room for centuries of rabbinic interpretation. The peshat shows us a vulnerable old man, without metaphors, without heavenly punishments, without hidden symbols, just old age, with its fragility and its dignity. And here the Torah does something profoundly human. It legitimizes disability. It doesn't demonize it. It doesn't moralize it. It simply exists, like the color of Esau's hair, like Jacob's soft voice, a reminder that the sacred also grows old. But the sages are not content with the surface, and it is almost inevitable that they begin to ask, why Yitzhak precisely? Why does the man who survived the Akedah end up living in darkness? The first midrash that appears is almost cinematic, the smoke of idolatry. Esau's wives, whom the Torah describes with laconic style as a bitterness of spirit, offered incense to their gods inside the house. The midrash imagines that smoke rising, irritating the eyes of the tzaddik, clouding the atmosphere both physically and spiritually. It is a powerful image. The moral air of a home affects even what we see. It is the ancient equivalent of saying that a toxic environment ends up burning not only the lungs, but also the vision. The next reading is more uncomfortable because it demands that we look at Yitzhak with honesty. Some commentators, like Sforno, suggest that his blindness is symbolic punishment. He closed his eyes to Esau's behavior, and heaven closed his eyes to him, measure for measure. It is even hinted that Esau's delicacies acted as emotional bribery, and here a halakhic principle of almost painful forcefulness emerges. Bribery blinds the wise. Isaac, the contemplative patriarch, is not immune to this. The Torah suggests that love can cloud judgment, that tenderness can become partiality, and that even a righteous person can look at their loved ones in too soft a light. Other Midrashim take this story to another level, the Akedah. They say that the angels wept when Abraham raised the knife, and that their tears fell into Isaac's eyes. Decades later, the light goes out. It's a beautiful metaphor. There are experiences so intense that they only reveal their impact when time has passed. Another tradition affirms that at the altar, Isaac saw the Shekinah, and no one can look at the divine fire without being marked. Blindness would then not be punishment, but a consequence of having been too close to the sacred, like someone who looks at an eclipse without spiritual protection. And of course, there is the providential reading. God wanted Jacob to receive the blessing, so he made Isaac unable to see. If Isaac sees, Jacob doesn't enter. If he doesn't enter, the history of Israel is not born. It's a bold idea, blindness as an instrument of providence. It doesn't deny natural or emotional causes. It simply affirms that they all converge on a greater purpose, that the Abrahamic blessing reaches the son, whose legacy will mark generations. Finally, contemporary readings. They don't speak of smoke or angels, but of psychology. They suggest that Isaac was not only physically blind, but also emotionally blind, that he needed not to see certain aspects of Esau in order to continue loving him. We all, to some extent, practice this selective blindness with those who are dear to our hearts. And it is both beautiful and dangerous. When we put it all together, a complex portrait of Isaac emerges. A man caught between divine light and human shadows, between devotion and paternal affection, between the traumatic past of the Akedah and the uncertain future of his conflicted sons. His blindness becomes a mirror of many forms of blindness: physical, moral, emotional, and providential. And perhaps the deepest lesson is this: sometimes, for history to move forward, someone has to walk blindly. Isaac loses his sight, but he does not lose the blessing. He is left without light, but he opens a path. The Torah seems to tell us that even when our eyes fail us, the purpose can still move forward. Because ultimately, the vision that matters is not always in the eyes, but in the faithfulness with which we continue to bless, even from the darkness. At this point, we've reached the halfway mark of this class, so we're taking a short break to let you know that if you're willing to make a donation, you can do so by scanning the QR code you see on the screen, or by clicking the link below in the description of this video. Personally, I, Abel Flores, sincerely thank you for your contribution, because it helps us a lot in continuing to produce all this content, which is free for everyone, and thus giving more people the opportunity to learn about these ancient teachings. You can also help us a lot by subscribing to this channel, La Mishna TV, giving us a like, and sharing this video on your social media and messaging apps. Thank you very much. Also, you should know that on our website, lamishna.com, you will find all these classes, supporting materials, texts, articles, reports, and supplementary information for our free course on the Mishna. Now, don't go anywhere, because we're continuing with our class. Now we are going to study this topic, but from a mystical perspective. Join me for a moment in Yitzhak's silent tent, where the light no longer enters through the eyes, but continues to burn in the soul. Because the Kabbalah, when it approaches this episode, is not just reading history. It is reading energy, the architecture of the cosmos, the invisible pulses that sustain existence. And there, suddenly, Yitzhak's blindness ceases to be a narrative detail and becomes a Sephirotic phenomenon. The Zohar begins by reminding us of something that seems simple, but that changes the entire scene. Each patriarch is a column of the tree of the Sephirot. Abraham is Hesed, expansive mercy. Jacob is Tiferet, the balance that harmonizes. And Yitzhak is Gevurah, rigor, intensity, containment. It is no coincidence that the left column, that of Gevurah, is associated with darkness, judgment, and limits. That is why the Zohar states, without mincing words, Yitzhak was totally connected to the left. That is why he became completely blind. It is almost poetic. When judgment is too pure, it cuts off the light, not because it is bad, but because it is too intense to be sustained on the physical plane. In Kabbalah, the eyes are not just organs, they are conduits of spiritual light, and an excess of light, too much rigor, too much intimacy with the divine, can burn the vessel. Something similar to Shavirat HaKelim, the shattering of the vessels. Imagine Yitzhak's life, the Akedah, that instant when he saw the raised sword, the trembling of the altar, the tears that the Midrash attributes to the angels. All of that, in Kabbalistic terms, is a discharge of Gevurah so intense that his eyes, over time, cease to be able to contain it. It's not that Yitzhak sees less, it's that he sees on another plane. He no longer sees the surface of the world, but he recognizes, by voice, touch, scent, the spiritual root behind things. That is why, when smelling Jacob, he says, Re'aj begadim, the aroma of his garments, which the sages interpret as the aroma of the Garden of Eden. Blindness does not take away perception. It changes its frequency. And here something precious comes into play. Blindness as a condition for blessing. For Kabbalah, blessings are not just pretty words. They are channels of divine energy. And Isaac, concentrated Gevurah, needs not to see the external in order to transmit the internal. If he sees, he judges. If he judges, he limits. If he limits, the blessing is diminished. His blindness frees him from appearances, making him available for the essential. The fact that he blesses Jacob, thinking that it is Esau, is not a mistake. It is a mystery. The light of Gevurah must pass to the son of the central column, Jacob, who is Tiferet, balance, harmony. And even so, Esau is not annulled. Part of the energy of rigor also belongs to him, because Edom, the tradition says, will have a role in human history. Nothing is lost. everything is channeled. When we bring together all the levels, peshat, midrash, Kabbalah, psychology, we discover that tradition does not want us to choose only one meaning. Isaac's blindness is senility, and it is a spiritual consequence. It is human fragility, and it is providence. It is punishment for not seeing, and it is a reward for having seen too much. For Kabbalah, all these layers coexist as superimposed planes of the same event. Reality is not univocal, it is multi-layered. And what should someone who teaches this topic take home? First, the textual anchor, Genesis 27:1, the simple phrase that starts it all. Then at least the 4 essential Midrashim, the smoke of idolatry, the tears of the angels, blindness as a divine instrument, and the idea that whoever does not see evil ends up losing their moral sight. And above all, the Kabbalistic intuition, Isaac as overflowing Gevurah, whose darkness is not a failure, but the exact point where judgment becomes too luminous to be grasped by the senses. On an ethical level, the scene is a delicate mirror. Loving a child for the pleasures he offers is dangerous. Closing one's eyes to his behavior is to betray the responsibility of educating him. But it is also true that old age, vulnerability, and disability are part of the fabric of creation. We should not romanticize them, but neither should we fear them. Isaac, blind, remains a patriarch. He continues to bless. He continues to be a channel. Perhaps therein lies the final lesson. Even when the light goes out in the eyes, it can be kindled in the voice. And sometimes God writes his designs precisely in that twilight. Because in the secret language of the Kabbalah, darkness is not the absence of light. It is the light that no longer fits in the world. Now, let me take you to an intimate space, almost as if we were lighting a candle in a dimly lit room. Because talking about blindness in the Bible is not just about eyes that cannot see, but about a human, spiritual, and political language that runs through all of sacred history. When we open the scriptures, we discover something fascinating. Blindness is not a single, unambiguous concept. Sometimes it's simply biographical. This person cannot see, as neutral as saying that someone is tall or dark-haired. Other times, it's the inevitable fragility of age, a reminder that the body wears out, just like sandals on the road. And other times, more unsettling, it's a metaphor for something deeper, the inability to understand, to orient oneself, to grasp the moral voice of the moment. In the Bible, seeing is never just seeing, and not seeing isn't either. But when this language enters the territory of the covenant, the atmosphere changes. In Deuteronomy 28, blindness appears as a curse, and the Lord will strike you with madness, blindness, and confusion of mind, and you will grope at midday. What a powerful image, a man groping his way under the brightest sun. Here, blindness is not a problem of the retina. It is existential disorientation. It is losing one's bearings, the compass, the divine guidance, idolatry, injustice, corruption. All of that, the Torah says, extinguishes the inner light long before extinguishing the outer one. And look how this connects with another key verse. A bribe blinds the eyes of the wise. It doesn't need to take away their physical sight. It's enough to distort their judgment, judicial blindness, moral blindness. This principle will be crucial for generations of commentators. Accepting an undue benefit is losing the ability to see the good. And yes, it's impossible not to think of Isaac and Esau's delicacies, that emotional blindness that, according to the Midrash, clouded the patriarch's discernment. Then there are the dramatic instances of blindness, those that strike like lightning in the middle of the narrative. In Sodom, the attackers are instantly struck blind, searching for the door but unable to find it. Evil is left without direction. Violence turns into clumsiness. And with Elisha, something even more ironic happens. Blindness becomes a defensive weapon. The Arameans lose their strategic vision, and suddenly military power melts like wax before divine providence. It's not a lifelong blindness. It's a pause, a divine restraint to prevent death. The prophets, however, go further. Isaiah says that the people see but do not understand. There, the blindness is no longer in the eyes, but in the heart. It is a spiritual numbness, a moral slumber. And almost always, this is important, it is reversible. The Bible never closes the door. Restoration remains possible, even when we walk in darkness. And yet, the Torah is extremely clear on another point. Physical blindness is not a curse. On the contrary, the blind person is protected by the law. You shall not put a stumbling block before the blind. It is almost an ethical manifesto. Do not use another's vulnerability to gain an advantage. Do not hide information from them. Do not give them advice that will cause them to fall. Halakha will turn this into a universal rule. Do not cause anyone to stumble, neither physically nor morally. When we reach the Gospels, the theme acquires a different narrative dimension. Jesus encounters again and again blind people who cry out, who search, who move forward without seeing. Physical healing becomes a metaphor for faith. The sight that the eyes recover is the sight that the heart already intuited. The man born blind in the Gospel of John is the perfect example. His illness is not punishment. It is an opportunity to reveal something about light, about truth, about looking beyond the surface. And perhaps that is the central lesson of this entire journey. In the Bible, blindness is never a simple diagnosis. It can be fragility. It can be a warning. It can be punishment. It can be protection. And sometimes, on the deepest level, it can be the beginning of a new way of seeing. Because there are eyes that only open when the external light is extinguished, and there are truths that are only revealed when one learns to walk humbly in the darkness. Sometimes, to understand blindness in the Bible, we need to make a simple gesture. Close our eyes for a moment. Because there, in the darkness, we discover that not all darkness means the same thing. There are those born blind, and those who lose their sight along the way, and Scripture treats each with a different kind of sensitivity. Think of the man born blind in chapter 9 of John. The disciples, with that mechanical logic we've all had at some point, ask, "Who sinned?" And the answer breaks the mold. Neither he nor his parents. No inherited guilt, no disguised punishment. His blindness is a stage for revelation, not a sentence. From later Jewish tradition, we could even say that this neshama, soul, came into the world with a task, a tikkun, rectification, and his limitation is part of the calling. Not to glorify suffering, but to interpret it in a different way. Very different is the blindness that comes with age or with decisions. Isaac, in the literal sense, is an old man. His sight fades like a candle at the end of the night. But in other narratives, Sodom, the Arameans, the prophetic passages, blindness appears as judgment, consequence, or divine pedagogy. Sometimes it is a warning, sometimes a restraint, sometimes protection. Each case has its own moral texture. And behind all this lies a fundamental theological distinction. Being born blind does not point to guilt, while becoming blind is usually intertwined with history, with decisions, with the covenant. Not always, but as a narrative tendency. The Bible, with its spiritual irony, also plays with a second level. There are those who see perfectly and are profoundly blind. And there are blind people who, by crying out, become icons of faith. The true darkness is not in the eyes, but in the inability to recognize the truth when it knocks at the door. And here comes the conclusion, the one we like so much and that always tries to leave a spark ignited. The question is never, why is there blindness? The question is, what do I do with the light I have? Because there are shadows that come without fault, shadows that come from our decisions, and shadows that God allows to teach us to listen better. What is decisive is not how much light enters through our eyes, but how much truth enters through our soul. And in the end, we all see a little, and we are all a little bit in the dark. The spiritual life consists of learning to walk like this, with humility, with honesty, and with the hope that even in the darkness, God continues to open a path for us. That's all for today's lesson. Until the next video, Shalom.